but also knowing that there was so much more that was impacting this last year for students, for yourselves as educators and community leaders, that was not just directly related to COVID. That the trauma that many of us and our students have been experiencing is far beyond just the pandemic. We've had environmental disaster and trauma, political violence, racial violence and trauma. So as we have our panel today that really asks this question about what has a year of distance learning taught us, where does it tell us about where we want to go? We also know that it's more than just distance learning, and invite you, when we ask the questions about what you're thinking and what you're bringing in, to make space for beyond just the virtual learning, because our students we're contending with virtual learning in addition to all of that stuff. Our goal for today is really to ask our panelists of both parents, educators, school leaders, what it has meant for them, what their personal experience has been over the past year, and have that be a part of a conversation to all of us about what it can mean as we think about what we have to do next and where we're going. Our kids are mostly back in the classroom this week. As many of you know, we know that virtual learning will likely continue in some way, shape, or form. And even if it doesn't, what does having done this process over the year tell us as we want to go forward? We also know you all hold a lot of expertise, so please do, again, we really don't just mean it, like we really would like for you all to be sharing what you know and how you're thinking about things. And at the end, really asking ourselves to also say, what is each of us going to do? I'm not a classroom teacher. I'm not in the school. I also am not a parent. But what is also my responsibility to thinking about how I want to support our kids' learning from the role and position in which I sit, even if I'm not in a classroom and I'm not a parent directly. And our first goal, and the first way that I wanted to participate in that challenge, was to see what voices through our OLC platform we could elevate today. So with that, I will pause there, and we are going to put you all in a breakout room. So I'm going to ask Jethro to do that. And we'll try to just get you in groups of about 5 folks. We're going to give you a few minutes, and the question that we wanted to have you in your breakout room is really pretty simple. Introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and if you're with an organization, if you're not, that's fine. And then to ask you to share just really briefly, what do you want to say about this past year of distance learning in particular, whether it's related to your own child and what you've seen, whether it's related to the students you serve and the families you've served. This is kind of what are you bringing in today? And what do you just want to say to the group? What is on your mind? What have you seen? And if there isn't something that you personally want to speak to from your experience in that way, is there a question you're really hoping we explore? So give us just a moment to open up that breakout room. You should have an invitation to join a room, and we will see you back at 10:20. All right, I think we are getting folks back in here. So I know we had 1 or 2 folks who filtered in. We are just getting started. We just spent a few minutes inviting folks to both share their introductions in the chat box, but then to also have a few minutes to connect with one another in a breakout room. Before we move on, I am going to just give a quick reminder to folks that we have officially launched our Oakland Literacy Symposium. You should have received an email if you're on our newsletter list about that. So we hope you'll mark your calendars for October 1st and 2nd of this year. It will be virtual this year. We are very excited to be presenting what we think will be a really great 2 days of learning focused for both our educators and focused for community folks who are really interested in how we use literacy to advance justice for all. So we will be sharing more info as that comes up. If you also just want to be involved in a deeper way, please let us know. Make sure you're signed up for our email list. An RFP will also be going out for you all to offer what workshop sessions you would want to present. So I will stop there. I think we can just turn off our screen share mode. And I will hand it over to Jethro, who will introduce our panelists to each of you.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so welcome, please, our fantastic panelists. We have Nikita Gibbs-Nolan, who was born and raised in Oakland. She attended Cal State East Bay and got her bachelor's in psychology. From 2005 to now, she's been working as an Oakland elementary school teacher. She was awarded the Teaching Excellence Award for recognition of her participation in the California Reading and Literature Project. And in 2018, she was featured in Teachers of Oakland and the State of Black Education, Oakland's Narrative Series. Nikita has been a mentor for new teachers and a lead teacher since 2008. So welcome, Nikita. I'd also like to welcome Ms. Patty Montoya. Patty was also born and raised in Oakland. She's currently a stay-at-home mom of 3. Francisco, her son, and Danica, her daughter, are attending Korematsu Discovery Academy in the 3rd and 4th grade, respectively. And her baby, Andrea, is just 20 months old. Also would like to welcome another educator, Ms. Roxanne Rose, who's originally from Los Angeles, but she's been an educator and school leader in public schools since 2007. Roxanne is committed to disrupting harmful school systems and redesigning the learning spaces, cultivating equitable opportunities and life choices. She enjoys reading nonfiction and prior to pandemic, loved to attend festivals, cultural events, concerts, and anything related to elevating the lives and experiences of the BIPOC community. And lastly, we have another fantastic parent, activist parent tonight. Today is Caroline Colson. She's the mother of one son, Saeed Colson Spikes, who attends Bret Hart Middle in the 8th grade. She's been an analyst with the state of California and the Department of Social Services for 15 years. And Caroline's goal is to ensure that all children have equity in education. So please welcome our fantastic panelists. And to start us off, I'm going to ask a question of everyone, and if Nikita can start us off, and then we'll go to Patty, then Caroline, and then Roxanne. So from where you're sitting today, after this full year of virtual learning, pandemic learning under your belt, what do you want our audience to know about either your child or your student? And particularly, is there something that you feel has been misunderstood? So
I think that, the most important thing is that our children are so resilient. We talked today about, what things that they felt proud of themselves about. And a lot of them, really struggled with that. But one of the things that I want to just put out there is that they are really resilient. Some of them are at home by themselves. Parents lost jobs. There's all different types of situations. So you really can't make assumptions about what's going on. But this year, they've welcomed us into their homes, and I've seen a lot, but the thing that really sticks out is their, resilience and how they've been able to pull through this year, even without the assistance of a parent sitting right next to them all the time, which sometimes we assume that everybody has that, and some of them don't, and they've pulled through. So that's what I'm most proud of, is about them and their resiliency.
Thank you, Nikita. And Patricia, same question to you. What do you want our audience to know about your child? And is there anything you feel has been misunderstood?
Same as Nikita said, it's like a lot of kids haven't had their parents there, and it's been hard. It's been a hard year. It's been, it's hard to get them into all their Zoom meetings, all the different times and everything. And some of us are lucky to, you know, be able to be here with them, but there are other kids that they don't have their parents to remind them, you know, you have to log in at this time, and then you have to go back at this time. And so they have to be like, you know, doing it all on their own. And I mean, they're kids. It's hard for them to remember all of their logins, all of their times, and they're doing it. Some of the kids are really trying and really doing it. So, you know, it's been hard. So I feel like a lot of kids had grown a lot with all this, you know, responsibility on for them. So just
Interesting.
really proud of all of them.
Yeah, they had to step up. Yeah, that's right. Everyone had to become more of an adult in a way. Great, thank you. And Caroline, next, same question to you. What do you want our audience to know?
I would just like to say for my son, he really had to step up and be more kind of on his own a little bit, you know, making sure he gets to classes because I'm an essential worker. So I wasn't always home for part of the year, but I kind of worked it out where I am home to make sure to give him the encouragement because it has been difficult for him. So, you know, I just like to just thank everyone, parents, teachers, staff, that has just been really, really supportive. There was a teacher that called and checked in on my son, you know, his mental state, you know, how he was doing, making sure he had all the equipment and things that he needed. So it's definitely been a community effort to make sure he's successful this year.
Thank you for sharing. Roxanne, same question to you.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, just what really is resonating is hearing Nikita and Caroline and Patty share about their experiences and their students and the resilience that it takes to have managed schooling this year. And this phrase right now, which is really being thrown around, which is, you know, learning loss, learning loss. We have to recover from learning loss. And it's like, yes, there has been a slowing down maybe of the supports and efforts and academic expectations that we want of our students and that we hold in high regard, but also like our students and our families have survived a pandemic. They are surviving every day. You know, we have students like Caroline just shared, who are managing themselves while parents are at home. They're managing younger siblings. They're figuring out technology. They're figuring out all the executive functioning that goes into organizing their schedule and logging on and having their lunch and getting themselves ready for school, sometimes doing that for siblings, sometimes doing that on their own. So the phrase for me, learning loss, it really is triggering, and I don't think it does our students justice and our families justice, and it doesn't speak to the incredible amount of bravery and resilience and creativity and independence and fear that has gone into this year. So I think I would love for folks to walk away with really the lens of like being more critical and intentional around how we're using this phrase learning loss and throwing it around. It's really not fair. And I don't really think it's, especially to our staff as well, who have been so creative and having to think about how to do school and meet the needs of their students and the community and the staff, and our students. So yeah, that's something that's really been sitting with us at our site and with me as someone who's, you know, leads a school and works with lots of teams of people, is shifting the lens from what feels like a deficit mindset around learning loss and actually, no, our students survived, our community survived. We need to shift from surviving to thriving next year. And how do we do that? So that is something I hope folks are able to sit with and think about.
Yeah. Thank you for highlighting that, Roxanne. I think that's very important to keep in mind, is that when we're looking at that, you know, learning loss, learning recovery, we're already putting students in a kind of deficit place. So thanks for sharing that. So I'm going to turn it over to Sanam, who will moderate the main section of our panel.
Great.
And just to remind you to keep putting those questions you have for panelists in the chat so that we can get.
Great. Thank you for getting us started and for those kind of opening and framing thoughts from each of you. I wanted to open by turning it over to Caroline and Patty, our two parents on this panel, who are representing the parent voice on this panel, and ask if you could tell us a little bit more. So you started with kind of what it is you hope folks know that they might not know, but if there are any specific things that stand out from your experience over the past year, whether it relates to that outstanding staff person who checked in with you, Caroline, or other issues or challenges that your child in particular faced that you want to highlight now. And I'll let Caroline go first.
Thank you, Sanam. Communication was definitely key for me. I had brought up in a meeting that, when my son wasn't able to sometimes getting, the internet was slow. I explained to them I wasn't able to get in contact with the attendance coordinator. So a staff member got in contact with the principal, made sure that we were able to call. If the person wasn't able to answer, we was able to leave a voicemail message so that our child won't be penalized because of attendance. And, teachers were more, they would contact us back much more easier. I would send an email out to different staff members and they would just call me back or email me back and answer my questions. Because like I said, my son is making a transition from the 8th grade to high school. And I just wanted to make sure he had enough credit and he was ready to move on to the next level. So I appreciated the communication that occurred this year.
Thank you, Caroline. Patty, what about you?
Yes. So one of the things that like I mentioned to Jetro, it was that sometimes like it's hard because me having 2 kids and the little one, I'm like constantly, moving around and everything. And I will walk in the room and I see my kids in the computer and, I'm assuming they're doing their work. And then I walk out and then sometimes at the end of the day, I would go back into their seesaw and to check to make sure they turned in their work and everything. And one time when like I let like a week go by without checking. And when I came back, I've noticed that they weren't turning in their work. And that was one of the things I'm like, I think they're doing their work and I think, they're doing in the computer and they're working. But they were actually not. And I didn't get like the teacher never called me to let me know, they're not turning in their work or anything. I think that would be one like really helpful thing, just like if the teachers can let you know that they are actually doing their work. That was the only incident like that 1 week, but I'm not sure if it's like all the teachers are like letting the parents know when the kids are actually turning in their work or not. But it will be really, something, especially, a lot of parents, some parents, I will say, don't know how to use the computer. They don't know how to check if the kids are actually doing their work. I'm actually, I actually know a little bit about computers. So I feel like I can actually check on them and everything, but there are other parents that can't do it. And it will be really helpful, to have somebody letting them know, how they're turning in or not turning in their work. So.
Yeah, I imagine that's good information to have. And, it occurs to me sometimes we ask these questions about what's working or what's not working. And I'd love to ask in more detail around this communication piece for you both. And you've touched on some of this, but are there specific ways that communication works best for you? So if we say like it's, what does it actually look like to have the kind of communication that supports you as a parent at home and your child learning at home? In what ways were some of those things useful? So Caroline, you spoke to kind of the actual, I think it was the phone calls were actually useful, and getting in touch. But are there things that you would say, if we have teachers who are listening, like this way of talking and getting the word out to us helps us the most? And if there's either one of you who wants to jump in on that.
I think that in the beginning, it would have been nice to have had a few Zoom calls just to kind of discuss how school will really look like. Because a lot of the syllabuses were sent to the students, not necessarily to the parents. And on Schoology, I was able to see his assignments, but I couldn't see whether or not they were turned in. And, the student has a viewpoint, and then there's the teacher, and then there's the parent. So we don't have access to everything. So that would have been nice if we would have had maybe more access, not necessarily to your side of Schoology, but to know whether or not our students had submitted an assignment so that, that we know that they're doing it, and not afterwards when it's late. There's multiple websites. So there's Schoology, there's Aries, and then there's the parent source. So maybe in the future, we can just have one where we can just go, click, and look at all the different things instead of going to multiple websites in order to get the information about our children. That would be very, very helpful.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd want to add, Patty?
That, I think she summed it up all.
So I'm going to pause real quick before moving on to hearing some similar perspectives on communication from Nikita and Roxanne. And before I do that, I'd love to invite the rest of our participants in the chat. Since many of you either have kids at home that you are managing these same kinds of challenges around communication with, or if you are on the other end and you have been supporting the communication for students and families at home, if we love to elevate kind of specific things that you think were most beneficial or got the best response. So inviting you all to take a moment to also contribute how you would answer that question in our chat. And if there are folks who do that, I'll happily also elevate those up to our panelists to include in the conversation. And while we do that, I will open it up to Nikita and Roxanne from the perspective of, representing your perspective as an educator and in school site leadership. What can you tell us about your experience communicating with families? Are there things that you shifted or worked really well for you or your school? And I will go ahead and start with Roxanne.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I think communication was definitely our #1 challenge starting last March, when we shifted. We're in the Fruitvale, and we do have a large mom community. And so even in person on campus, making sure that our families had access to all the information, the schedules, family meetings, et cetera, took some extra intentionality. And so it took even more so because now there's this added layer of communicating either via WhatsApp or on the phone, or in most cases, using Zoom. So we were able to hire one of our parents who is bilingual, mom and Spanish. So that was really important as a parent liaison for that community, for our mom community, to have access to what was going on. I think once our students started to really understand how to use the technology, it made access for families a lot easier in terms of attending parent meetings, conferences, our family meetings, because they were able to just use their student's Chromebook and use the Zoom link that the student used for class, or to have access to our links for family and staff our family meetings. So sort of seeing the transference of students becoming comfortable with technology, and then them supporting their adult at home with being able to access that in terms of a communication strategy was really empowering. And, there is a little bit of a burden when you're asking students to do the educating for their families, but there's also some pride and some power that goes into that. And I think, we definitely saw an increase in parent engagement and in parent involvement as a result, because they were logging in from work. We had families logging in for meetings from the store. We had some who were just listening because they were grocery shopping, which really, increased the ability for our families to be engaged and keep up with what was going on. And that is something that we've talked about keeping moving forward, is even if we're having family meetings in person or back to school night or, you know, parent conference in person, being able to always stream it in some format. Really rethinking the time that we were communicating with families as well was important to make sure we could be available when they were free. And yeah, I mean, I think overall communication was, you know, it's the crux of everything in terms of making sure our families and our students are on board. But it was also really isolating and really lonely because our building was very quiet. It felt very transactional at points. It felt very isolating, I would say, because, you know, in the same way that we're not chit-chatting with each other now, that wasn't happening with families. Families weren't communicating with each other in the same way that they would if they're on campus. I wasn't having informal conversations in the same way I would in the cafeteria with a parent because they're not there and I need to schedule a Zoom call or I need to go into a breakout room. So while there was definitely an increase in seeing faces on Zoom and being able to communicate with parents, it was on the flip side of that also, it didn't feel as personal or as warm. So pros and cons to both, but definitely an increase in parent engagement overall.
Thanks, Roxanne, for that. And I'll hand it over to Nikita.
I think Roxanne said it all, but
I'm sorry. I also talk a lot, so you can just cut me off.
No, that's okay. No, I think you just brought about some of the most important parts is that, you know, Zoom meetings were helpful. I think talking points, you know, one of the apps, you know, was also important to have in order to increase that communication. We had, you know, community meetings, but I don't think that they were very well attended. So that also takes some strategy to try to figure out how you can get more parents involved, you know, and some of the, you know, thoughts that maybe, you know, they didn't want to come may have been there, but I think a lot of it is the communication piece is that we're using talking points. A lot of the translation is flawed. So they'll get a message, but not really understand what it's saying. You know, it doesn't translate appropriately, which is a huge issue in our student population. We have 70% English language learners, but we don't have that amount of translation, so, or that translation support. So it was really difficult in some cases for me to be able to get in, you know, touch with some of my mom or Spanish speaking parents because we don't have that level of support at our school site. And so I had to, you know, beg and borrow friends who, you know, are Spanish speaking and say, hey, you know what, I really need to get, you know, these parents, you know, and let them know what's going on. And so that was helpful for me. I do have a retired principal friend who is bilingual, so she helped out a lot in that to be able to get in contact with the parents and let them know what was going on. More frequent conversations has also been helpful. I know that usually, you know, sometimes, I mean, parents hear from me, you know, throughout the time before it's time for report cards, but, you know, it wasn't as frequent as it has been in this environment. I've been a lot more communicative with them and calling, you know, texting has really been helpful because, you know, sometimes they don't answer the phone, but they will text you back. So that's been helpful too, just whatever way you can, because I mean, we have to present a united front with one another because, I mean, in the end, we have to do what's best for our children.
Thank you. And I'd be curious if there are things that would be helpful to support you, Roxanne and Nikita, with that communication. Like if there's something, if you could add a resource or a tool that maybe you didn't have or that would have helped you. It sounds like I'm hearing something around translation, if that felt like it's readily available enough or in the way that you want. But are there any things that would have helped you to do what you wanted to do faster, quicker, more effectively?
I think technology, it took us a while to get everybody, you know, computers and things like that, so that kids didn't have a way to log on right away. And just like you said, that translation piece is huge because, you know, there are things that are lost in translation all the time. If we can't communicate with our parents, that's huge. You know, they want to be involved, but it's just there's, you know, a lack of a way to be able to get in contact with them in their native language. So that's a struggle. And then we did have a teacher on special assignment, but she was specifically helping the newcomers. So, you know, when you have one person trying to support a whole staff, that also doesn't work. And she was part-time. So maybe allocating those resources where we're able to have somebody who is fluent in Hmong. We have one person in the district, you know, and everybody goes to her and has to make an appointment with her. So I think that a lot of our own parents, you know, things get lost, you know, they're not able to get the messages across, or, you know, someone has to call them and speaking in Spanish to them, you know, so that's been really difficult.
Thank you. Anything you'd
Yeah.
add?
I mean, similar across the board. So we were using a platform for a while called Dean's List, and that was helpful because it was a messaging. So it was helpful for a few reasons. One, you could make reports, which you could text to families at the end of each week, which had updates on how they did with Lexia or Zern or their attendance. It was also a place to capture like PBIS systems, you know, points for behavior and incentives and whatnot. So it was helpful in that way, but I think also what was really helpful is that it did do texting to families in their preferred language. There just wasn't the ability for them to text back. So we were able to get messages out, but there wasn't like a two-way form of communication. And I think something that really came up for us too, which we need to rethink, and I'm sure this is at all schools, is just the burden that we put on our multilingual and bilingual staff for us who are monolingual with asking them to do our translation. So oftentimes I'm in spaces where I have to lead meetings or I need to talk to a few families, and I'm always asking someone else to essentially do the meeting with me. And for some people, that's, you know, they're proud to do that and they're happy to jump in. And for some, that's taking away from their actual job, which is to tutor or be on teaching PE or teach their class, you know. So we had a lot of conversations this year on how to delineate getting translation support at our school without putting that extra lift and burden on other folks, but also realizing that there's like a need and we needed the help for us monolingual people who can't communicate as authentically as we would like to with our staff and mostly with our families. So something that we're definitely thinking about for next year too is what type of apps, what kind of phone services we can use and rely on without having to rely necessarily always on our other staff who are doing other things as well.
Thank you for that and helping us hear some kind of specifics around the things that have worked. And I appreciate both that we're highlighting the need to make sure we're speaking in two directions in multiple languages, but that also, I hadn't really thought around the ways that we potentially tax the few folks who have the ability to communicate with our families in multiple languages. I want to just elevate a few things. Thank you for those of you who've been joining in the chat, that there is definitely some echoing of texting services like talking points from the participants as well. Also Class Dojo, people saying, yeah, I've definitely been texting more than I normally would, and making a point to translate messages as much as possible. Also, it would be really helpful to all students if teachers would ensure that every student is engaged before failing the class, which is another point for us to think about, and I think we can get into as well. I am going to stay really for a few minutes with our educators on the Zoom right now, and ask if you could just share with us, we've heard some specifics around communication and what you've seen, but drawing from kind of the year you've had, what are some ways you personally, or in the way that you're cultivating your classroom, your team, community, that you're approaching your work differently, going in, exiting this past year and heading into a next one soon? And I can hand it over, if there's anyone who wants to start in particular, I'll hand it over to Nikita this time.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the ways in which you are approaching your own work differently after this year, or if it's the way you're working with either your students or your team, your school community.
I think that one of the most important parts is that, I want them to continue with this technology piece. I think a lot of times with elementary, it tends to get put to the side. Well, they'll have a technology course or elective later, but we have to start really getting our children acclimated to having that knowledge and technology. They know how to play the games, and things like that, but we have to show them. Now they have, the ability to be on a Zoom call and know how to share their screen and know how to, create some of these Google Docs or fill out a Google form, which some adults don't have that knowledge. So I think that actually increasing their knowledge, they can also share that with their families, which they have, because some of the times where I've had a parent meeting, the kids, like Roxanne said, had to help their parents get on. But, once you can pass that message on. And so later the parents will be able to do it themselves too. So that's one of the things I feel like is just, us all being able to, work together to be able to help one another, because it's their children, but I also call my students my children too, because they are mine. We share them. So we have to work together in order to do what's best for them. So.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Yeah, I was sharing in our breakout group this morning, there's just so many things, so many layers that I've been thinking about as we are finishing out this school year. I think it's important that while we are looking ahead, we're also not forgetting that we have, a solid 2 months left in this year as well that we have to, really take good use of. But one big thing that we've been shifting in our practice this year has really been around attendance, and what we're doing with our families to sort of do case management work before we end up having more formalized attendance calls and more formalized SART meetings. A lot of what's been brought up around schedules, learning spaces at home, understanding the technology, understanding the executive functioning that goes into self-managing your day. We have been supporting some of our students with. So we've provided, timers, we've provided desks if they need it, we've provided visual schedules, we've set up their computers with links that are on their desktop, so it's easy for them to find, to try and sort of negate some of the issues that were coming up that were preventing them from joining, and then therefore they were being marked absent. So our leadership team, and we have a partnership with EBAC. We've been doing case managing all year with our top 20 to 30 students who really need support with attendance before getting to that place of, okay, now we're going to formalize an attendance plan that's based in SART because of X, Y, and Z. So I really want us to continue thinking about that next year and not just watching students' attendance become more and more chronically absent before we decide then, okay, we're going to reach out to families. But what are we doing as soon as we're noticing a pattern, and how are we supporting them in whatever that reason is that they're not being able to attend class, and helping them and be more proactive with that. So that I think is a really big point for us to think about next year at our school in particular. And I hope that all schools are thinking along those lines. And I think this year too, we really took as a staff, like all hands on deck approach. And I know that can be kind of problematic if not managed correctly, because then everybody's doing everything and overworked all the time. But also in this scenario this year, we had our janitorial and custodial staff was helping with organizing our food bank once a week. All of our admin and our leadership team, we all did a reading group in the afternoon. I haven't taught a reading group in probably like 6 years, but we needed to ensure that students were getting reading intervention. And in order to do that, we all needed to have a reading group. So we did. So, our third grade art teachers, before they're teaching art in the morning, they're helping with attendance calls for third grade. So really also thinking about how to utilize people's skill sets and how to sort of break down, I think, the hierarchy and the binary of like my job, your job, but actually this thing is needed, and who is available right now to create the system for it or jump in and do it. is really going to be invaluable for next year too. And then I think in terms of like approaching our time differently next year, I think, you know, right now public schools are set up. We are in school from 8:30 to 3:30 and school happens then. And then we expect kids to do homework and independent work outside of that time. And it's like, I really want us to think too, like, how do we best use the time that we have for school, for learning, for the online platforms? How do we ensure in that time that students have time to play, students have time to reconnect, students have time to be kids? You know, so much of the socialization and the joy of school was sucked out of them this year because, you know, they're at home by themselves all the time, or they're at home with family and they don't get to have that same social interaction. And that's a huge, huge, huge component of being in school for kids. So yeah, I really want us to think also about how we're using time, how we're engaging our students in like really intentional opportunities and organic opportunities to be social, to engage in the arts, to engage in play, even at the high school level. You know, play and social engagement and social interaction doesn't stop when you're in 5th grade. So would love for us to think about that next year and how we're organizing our schedules and really allowing a space for students to adjust to being back on school and not just focusing solely on the academic piece, which is important and is definitely a priority, but also the other pieces of student learning as well.
Thank you for that. I wanted to pause for a moment and invite Caroline. I know you had a comment that you put in the chat, and I'd love if you could kind of help us expand, as we've heard from some of the educators around both the communication and the things that they've been trying. And if there was, just open that up for you to kind of share and elaborate what you were saying.
So what I stated was that teachers need to make sure that every student in the classroom is engaged. Don't just focus on the students that always want to answer your questions, but check in with those other students who haven't been saying anything, because some teachers don't necessarily require everyone to turn on their camera. They just type here. So you don't know if that child is there. You don't know if that child is engaged, and it will be detrimental to those children who you're not checking into, you know, making sure that if they're falling behind with a few assignments, reach out to the parents and say, you know, when I'm asking your child this question or something about the concepts I'm presenting, they're not understanding. So I just want to check in, because it may be some other things that they may need. It may be food. It may be that, you know, they're taking care of someone else in the household. So just not focus in on the students that are ready to answer your questions, but making sure everyone in the classroom understands, is participating. You know, sometimes they may be uncomfortable to talk to you in front of the class setting, or put it in the chat because it's all new to them. So I think it would be good if you make sure, if it's not in the classroom, that they come maybe to your office hours, to just make sure that they're having a really rich experience as the rest of the children in your classroom.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just pause if any of the panelists want to follow up on anything before I move on to a new set of questions. All right. Nikita, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how you as a teacher are thinking about kind of the engagement piece, actually similar kind of theme to what Caroline just brought up, and instruction as students kind of return to the classroom. And if there's anything else that, you know, especially around engagement instruction that's come up for you, whether it's the SEL needs of your students or just more around the instruction that has come up for you in the past year, that you've tried or that you'd like to see happen.
Some of the things that, you know, have worked really for me,
Hold on.
I think. I'm sorry. Okay, like that SEL piece is really important, especially right now. Like we've always had morning meetings and sometimes even meetings after recess to just talk about or debrief what happened at recess. If it was some drama at recess, try to figure out how can we fix that, as just problem solving with one another. But I think that like that definitely will be something going forward that I will continue, is having that time set aside in the morning just to be able to talk about some of the things that, they want to share, that they're going through. We do that in our morning meetings now. They go into breakout rooms and, I pop into all of them and, they're in a small group. So they're able to just talk to one another and bring things up. Sometimes they've asked me, can I meet with you privately? Sure. To be able to talk about some of the things that, have been going on in their families and lives. And I think that's extremely important because you have to be able to have a clear mind to be able to focus on fractions. You can't, go in there when, your parents lost their jobs or you're hungry and, like different things like that, that our children definitely face those issues. And I think focusing on like, really having a strategic plan moving forward in regards to how to address some of the things that, we weren't able to get to. We need to talk about it as a school, about some things that, worked, some things that didn't work, and, how do we move forward? And as far as the student engagement piece, I think their opinions matter. So I always ask them, like what out of the activities that we've done, Jamboard, we do, breakout rooms. Sometimes we go on virtual field trips. Which ones do you like? Which one do you prefer? So we've done some Zoom polls to ask them, well, I like this one the best. So those are things that I'll try to incorporate a little bit more. And I think that that's also a big piece, is giving the children a voice and asking them, what do you want to see? Because that's how you're going to keep them engaged, finding out what they want. And if this didn't work, I'm not going to take it personally because, you're the customer. So, we're focusing on that satisfaction piece. So what do you need? And I, try to make it, like a welcoming environment so they feel comfortable coming to me about different things that are going on, so that even if it's like I'm having an issue with this, you don't have to make that comment to the whole group. You could send me a message privately and say, this is what I need, and so that it can be addressed.
Oh, thank you both. And thank you for elevating also our student voices and perspectives. And in another time, I would love to also ask you how that same kind of, what are ways that, especially I think this is something we think about in our organization a lot, is especially when working with the younger and elementary kids, what are the ways that we can actually elevate student voice with really young kids? It's often talked about from a high schooler perspective of like student directed and what can we do for students. So it's such a great additional thing to think about. And I will pause if anyone in the panel wants to add to like that kind of what are ways that maybe the student voice has worked with elementary kids, but I also know I'm veering us off a little bit. So I won't force anyone to answer that question, but I'll just pause. And again, in the chat, if you have great ways you've seen or have successfully done that to bring student voice into your practice, then we'd love to hear about it. All right, I will leave that right now for our chat conversation. So again, if any of you have also been doing that with any grade, but in particular with your elementary students. So I'll just pause for a moment in case there is anyone who wants to contribute in the chat about eliciting student voice and agency. Dana, thank you for that contribution. You're the customer. That lens shifts power dynamics in a way that better serves students. All right, I'm gonna move over back to Patty and Caroline, and ask you to share, as we come up against our last 10 or so minutes for this section, what are the things for you, if there's anything else you want to add or share about things that have worked for you that you see as really promising, critical, or effective, whether it was yourself as the parent helping direct your students' learning, or the relationship with the school and what they were doing at school, or if there's anything that you would love to see left behind and that did not work for you. And I will head over to Caroline first.
I think communication is key. That is so important. And realizing that, if your student needs something, try to be really flexible. I've been understood that my son is a visual learner. And so I had to reach out to my son's school and ask if the math teacher can use visual aids instead of just her talking. And she refused. And so I had to be really assertive. And not all parents are as assertive as I am. So I think just being real flexible to try to meet the needs of each student. And I really appreciate Nikita's remark about students being the customer. That's because it's a power shift. It's not about necessarily what I want, but what's in the best interest of all the children that I actually have the ability to teach. One of the things that I would like for us to see is to make sure that each school has links for every parent to get on the website, if it's housing, if it's food, if it's just, understanding curriculum for their child's grade level, the different things that they can click on so that they can be able, if they don't feel comfortable talking to a teacher, if their child feel that they're not getting all the information, that they can click on the actual link and be able to get that information so that it can assist them while we're still making this transition during this pandemic. I think that would be really helpful and really encouraging, particularly for, parents that have children that may have a developmental disability or an IEP plan, to just get that information. They may not be able to make this particular Zoom call or chat with that particular staff or teacher. That would be a little bit more helpful and a little bit more easier for them as we're going along through this process together.
Wonderful. I know I jotted a lot of those things down, so thank you, Caroline. Patty, anything you would share from your experience similarly around things that have worked, that were tried, again, that either you did that you'd love to share with other folks, or that worked between your teacher, your school site, or things that really just did not and you'd like to see done away with, or enhanced or reformed?
So I feel like for us, it worked a lot. I feel like a lot of the times when kids have internet problems, they can't log in, we didn't have a backup, what do we do since the computer's down, we don't have access to internet. So we had workbooks that I had them do whenever they weren't they didn't have access to the internet. And I feel like that would have been really helpful, because I actually got the workbooks myself, if the school had provided something, in case when the kids didn't have internet, they had a workbook or something that they could be working on instead, or worksheets, anything, so they don't not use it as an excuse. Oh, my computer's not working, so I guess it's a day off. So they can have something to a backup. And I feel like that worked for us a lot. We had a lot of books. If they don't have to, if they're not doing their work, they can be reading. They can something else, actual books. I also got them myself, the books, but it will be nice if they had been provided, for us. And then things that I think shouldn't go forward. I mean, I feel like attendance should not be, I don't even think they should be taking attendance. The test scores, I'm not sure how that's gonna work. I know my kids did like I think it's the LPAC test, some like math and English, and I'm not, are those test scores gonna be like, on the record? Should they be on the record? I feel like they shouldn't. I don't know how it's gonna work. I don't think that attendance should be on the record either. But that's just what I think.
Patty, were there times where you were able to like have the space to ask for those kinds of things you needed, knowing technology was becoming an issue? And was that received well? Was there any attempt to help support you with some of that additional stuff that you needed?
I actually didn't ask. I would just like if we had a problem, I would even like I already had the workbooks, so I had the kids do it. I feel like I didn't want to like bother the teachers that much, because I know they're having problems too. I know my son's teachers, they're not really good with technology, and they told us like at the beginning of the school year, and so I felt like that would be like, they already have so much to deal with. If I could do this on my own, I would do it. But I know other parents might not, be able to do it, or they don't have the resources, or even they can't how to do it, like where to start with the correct books that they might need for their kids and everything. So it would have been like if they had offered it to me, it would have been great. But I felt like I didn't want to bother them too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to acknowledge that everyone was dealing with a lot, and I imagine you're not the only parent who either felt that way, or was feeling something that maybe they weren't saying. And I think it's easy and natural for a lot of us, in knowing, oh, there's like this great pandemic outside, or there's all this stuff, to kind of minimize maybe the need that you're experiencing. That is a really important need that you're minimizing. So I can certainly see how that might be something similar that a lot of parents are also expressing. So it's important to kind of share that and name that here. And I also appreciate that it's a tactical thing that we can think about doing and addressing, is having those additional non-technology resources. Roxanne, I'm going to turn to you. Before we head into the question and answer, I was going to ask if you could share, other than the access to technology, which we certainly know was an incredible, contributed greatly to the issues around equity and student participation. Are there other gaps that you saw that were either increased, that were really highlighted over the past year? And what are some of the ways you and your team have been thinking about taking some of those on?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. There's definitely been a few things. I think one, to Patty's point initially about the materials and students and families having access to non-technology school resources, that was a challenge for us as we launched into virtual school. So we created monthly distribution days for families to come, socially distant, do a virtual drive or a drive-by and pick up pre-made like bags of school materials with either booklets or worksheets and glue, scissors, crayon, markers, etc. And that was really well received, and something that I would love for us to continue doing next year too. Just our students, if they don't have access, they need access. I think it's our responsibility as a school to ensure that kids have what they need if they can't get that on their own. So I think that was a huge one for us. I think this really just illuminated to me on a very high national level that there is money for schools. Like, there is money for schools because we got money. So it shouldn't have taken a pandemic for us as a country to get hundreds of thousands of dollars for learning loss mitigation funds in order to get materials and teachers and tutors and technologies into classrooms. And so it's heartbreaking for me to think that this is what it took. But now we do have funds. And so, I think some of those gaps that we're seeing will hopefully be able to be, gaps don't just get filled with money, just to name that off the bat, but there will be space for us to think about, schools that need more materials, schools that need extra tutors or translation support. We need different types of updated technologies. We need any, maybe we need art and music and extracurricular programming. And we don't have them, and now there's an opportunity for us to have it, because there's this like pool of money that we're being given as we're reopening. I think another sort of like equity need that was sort of highlighted also was just around, especially for our schools in the Fruitvale and for our school in particular, our international student support, and how we're supporting not just language development, but the social emotional needs of students who are newcomers to our school. And then in the same vein, for us as a site in particular, we did see a decrease in engagement from families, our Black and African American identified families. And that is something as a school we've been grappling with for a long time. But in particular this year, around engagement and attendance in whatever form we're sort of calculating attendance, was our Black family engagement. So that is something that we are really thinking about as we're finishing out this school year and thinking about ways to launch next year too, to ensure that their presence and their voice and their brilliance and their experiences are valued and heard and seen, and that we're really being intentional to do outreach to make sure that they feel part of our school community. And I think another one too was just around the need for mental health support. I don't know what a lot of other schools look like in terms of mental health counseling and services, but our school we're a large school. We have over 600 kids, and we're really thinking too about the need, not just at the teacher level and classroom level, to have really solid SEL trauma-informed practices and rituals in the classroom to support students as we transition back. But also, we have students that have experienced higher levels of trauma than any of us can imagine for a number of reasons, given the pandemic, given the experience of Black and Brown families and community members in this country and in Oakland in general. So having mental health support, having counselors, having therapists, I think is going to be huge as we reopen and as we are thinking about the needs of our kids beyond the classroom, but them as whole little people. So I think that's been really highlighted this year too.
Thank you. There are certainly several competing ways that we have to both, I'm seeing in the chat, use the money that's coming in, the many ways that we need to support students and teachers as they re-enter into the classroom. And this is certainly not probably the most universally exhaustive list, but I think what you all have shared really starts speaking to and capturing both because it's based on your kind of imminent experience, but really speaking to, I think, a lot of what can support our students in many different schools beyond the ones you are teaching in. I am going to turn it over to Jethro, who is going to help us get our Q&A underway so you all can ask the questions that you want to ask to our panelists.
Yes, so please, everyone, put your questions that you have for our panelists in the chat box. I've jotted down the ones that have been put in so far. And just to get us started off, I thought I'd do a little poll. So I heard from panelists, people brought up communication, mental health needs, maybe the assessments, what they look like. So of all these different aspects, what do you think will impact your work over the coming year? So choose as many of those that you think will be the most crucial for your work over the year. And if you have any questions, you can also put those in the chat box. And yeah, it's interesting to hear that parent engagement communication in some cases has doubled. I've heard, but I heard from Patty that although there was increase in kind of the direct parent teacher conferences, the actual site engagement wasn't as much. So those kind of monthly meetings, attendance was down. Okay, as you click on our poll questions, I'm going to, first question I have is from Chris, wondering for either of the two teachers, has there been resistance to the technology, the programs, the apps from parents? Has there been resistance, and how do you address that when there is, if there is?
From my perspective, there hasn't been any resistance in regards to it. I think that it's just the lack of knowledge. If you don't understand something, then it's going to be harder for you to be able to get to. So they just need assistance. So I think that the answer to that would just be providing them the help that they need to be able to access that technology to be able to help their children.
Same. We haven't had any resistance. Families and students have been eager to learn and be on the computer and be able to access school and have technology at home and hotspots if needed, and something we're trying to think about for next year too. Definitely very minimal, if, like Nikita said, almost no resistance to tech this year.
There hasn't been an issue. That's good to hear. Okay, and yes.
Sorry, I will say, I think there's like resistance in terms of like they're always on the computer, so they're doing it for school, and now they're on YouTube for fun, and now they're doing Roblox or whatever the newest app and game is. So we have had a few conversations with kids about like how to have healthy boundaries around being on technology, but in terms of like actually having the computer and having access to it, there hasn't been any resistance.
Yeah, and I'm curious actually about that from the parents as well. Have the schools supported you at all?
Sorry.
Have the schools supported you in managing screen time? Because we see there's this big ask of you, literally managing classroom time. But more to what Roxanne was saying, have you gotten any kind of advice on kind of taking breaks and things like that?
I haven't. I'm not sure if Caroline has. But we have not discussed that with the school.
Just the requirements of managing their school time. Oh, interesting. Caroline?
Yes, just managing the school time. I actually had to speak to my child's doctor about screen time, but he's on the laptop all day. So what is being asked and what he needs to do for school, it doesn't equate to really good use for him. So no, I haven't gotten any sound advice from the actual school.
Okay. Okay, I want to turn to the next question. We have quite a few volunteers with us today, and people who are managing volunteers. So wondering from the educator side, which platforms are most important for volunteers to have a general understanding as either tutors or classroom assistants in terms of apps and things like that? Roxanne?
Yeah. I think the one for younger grades, which we've really leaned into a lot and have found to be successful, is Seesaw. I don't know if Seesaw is something that you can have on your own or if you need a school or district license for, but it allows students in a very like user-friendly, engaging, colorful, bright way to upload pictures of their own work. They take a picture on their camera and they can upload it. They can access different lessons. And then the nice part is that they can do some recording of their responses. So if you need to hear your students reading, or if you need to, I don't know, if the students are doing something orally, then there's the, ability for them to upload oral responses. And so that's given them a lot of independence, a lot of creativity. And then going back to one of the questions around like engagement, it's been able to have a higher level. We've seen a higher level of engagement from students. One, they think they're like cool little YouTube stars, they're young and they're recording their responses and they take pride in that. And then it's also just fun. So they want to do it more because they get to replay themselves. So Seesaw, I would definitely say. And then for our upper grades, teachers, they've been using Nearpod, and that's been a really nice platform as well, similar to Seesaw, but a little bit more mature for our 3rd through 5th graders. Kind of the same kind of aspects to Seesaw, but just a little bit more of a older facing visual.
Okay, thank you. And next question is kind of more of a general question. Do you feel for educators that schools have a strong volunteer base to support learning?
I don't think that our school particularly that we do. And I think that the ones that are available usually tend to support K through 2. And a lot of that focus is on literacy. But I think that one of the things that is misunderstood is that 3rd through 5th grade also struggles with literacy. A lot of them come to me as a 4th grade teacher reading at a kindergarten or 1st grade level. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and as an upper grade teacher, you don't get provided, like, Wanda was saying, you don't get provided that training. They feel like at that point, your children are already readers. So, those phonics trainings and things like that actually go to the K through 2 teachers. And a lot of the volunteers actually go there too, to those grades. But I think that what's needed more is the 3rd through 5th grade volunteers.
Thanks. And the next question, and I'm not sure that our panel has this information, but please, the information that you know from Benji at AIM High, do schools have a sense of what percentage of families will be back on campus for the remainder of the school year? I know, for example, Patricia has opted not to be. So are there particular groups of students that are indicating they don't want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer, at least for our site. We did a lot of sort of preliminary engagement with families around being able to return and their interest level. For a number of reasons, a lot of families said no. One is like, there's not much time left in the school year. It's disruptive to their own work schedule because they have babysitter and whatnot already handled and taken care of. Some, didn't feel safe yet. Some were confused about vaccine. Some enjoyed just having their child home. So right now we have about 20% of our students back. They started this week. So for us, that's about 110 to 120 students, and we have 650. And we made lots and lots of phone calls, at least, probably 300 at minimum just to get to this 120. So I do wonder sometimes if we had opened earlier, if more families would have said yes. We do anticipate everybody coming back in August, assuming that we could reopen in August. But right now, we have about 20% of our families.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Nikita, which of your families are opting not to return that you've seen?
Out of the 22 students that I have that log on every day, only 6 of them have chosen to return. And I think a lot of it is because it's only from 12:30 to 3. Some of the parents, have to work. So having them dropped off and having to be picked up, and you know that after that 2.5 hours, they weren't willing to do that. And just like Roxanne said, some of the issues are safety, you know, that they're concerned about, but a lot of the parents have opted to just keep the children at home.
I'd
Yeah.
also add, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would just also add too that we've had a number of families move. I don't know if other schools have experienced similar, but I think the pandemic, if we're talking about issues of equity, has really highlighted the incredibly expensive housing in Oakland, and it's made it really hard for a lot of our families to maintain housing in Oakland. So they've been moving further and further out. Their students are still enrolled because they've been virtual, and next year they're going to unenroll because they won't be able to physically be here. But I think that's also been pretty highlighted this year too, is just the need, which is for another conversation around affordable housing, to keep our families in Oakland so they can come to school in Oakland. So that's really been highlighted this year too.
And I want to stay with this theme, just ask the parents, if you had that option to continue for next year as a hybrid, would you, take advantage of that, or are you eager to have your kids go back in person?
I said I would. It would all depend on how everything looks, at that point. if I feel like it's safety for them to go back, I would definitely have them go back. But if I feel, any concerns with their health or anything, I would opt out. But it all depends on, how everything is by then.
I would really need to see their COVID-19 mitigation plan. I really need to know how you're cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting. My son is not able to take the shot because he's too young. So I really need to know, what is really going to happen and what's it going to really look like. I know that the district and the OEA just came together for an agreement, but we don't know who's going to be vaccinated. We don't know about the different variants that are still coming into our country. People have to understand that just because you get the COVID-19 vaccination shot, it doesn't mean that you won't get COVID. And I think that needs to be expressed. So a lot of our kids, they can't get vaccinated. So I need to make sure that the measures in place are going to be followed. The actual schools will be actually fixed and repaired. And if something does break down, that the maintenance order will be in place and that it will be fixed immediately. Because we have problems before the pandemic where things weren't fixed properly and immediately. Things were on the back burner because, okay, as long as this one's working, we're going to keep it moving. So we just have to make sure that everything is in place and everything is going to be followed, and we can't get relaxed simply because we're going to be opening up June 15th, according to our governor. So I have to make sure that me and my son are safe. That's number one priority to me.
Yeah. That's going to take a lot of communication, definitely. Thank you, Caroline. So this will end our Q&A section for the day. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sanam to take us to our closing.
Great. I'm just gonna, we wanted to close. Thank you for all of the great questions. Thank you for, I'm trying to also follow the conversation in the chat. And I know many of you are speaking together. If we were at an in-person OLC forum, as you know, we would have more time to have conversations at tables and let everyone dig in. And so hopefully this still allowed us some of that. And I appreciate you all engaging in that way. Before we go to our final close, and I will say, if by any chance you do have to pop off early, Nishat has been putting the evaluation link in the chat. So please make sure you do that before you go. It's infinitely helpful to us. It's very short. And before we close, I'm going to ask one final question of each of our panelists, which is really, I want to give each of you a chance, now that we've kind of had the almost hour-long discussion, to think about what you want to leave our audience with. Give you each about a minute and a half. What do you if there wasn't something said, or there's just something that's really still on top of mind that you want either other educators, school leaders, folks on this call who work in service, who are other service providers, community, what is something you hope we know, either do differently or a call to action that you hope we leave with? And I am going to start with Nikita. I'm choosing randomly, so hopefully that works.
I think that just one of the things is just like the whole thought of going back to school. I don't know, that whole framing just bothered me from the very beginning. The students have been in school. They've been learning, and the teachers and students and everybody else have been stepping up to make sure that those kids get what they're supposed to have every day. So they're in school, they're learning online, and they're learning a lot of different new things being online, having this different experience. So there has been some positives that have come out of this tragedy, but also too, it's just maintaining that parent teacher communication. I think that's the most important thing that we just really need to continue to have going forward. I mean, it's a literacy coalition. We need to have a parent and teacher coalition too. We're on the same page. We're fighting the same cause. And so we need to be there for one another and realize we both have different things that are going on, but us understanding more to be able to help the children is the best thing to do. So
thank you. Caroline.
I would just say that just be cognizant of other people. Not everybody's in your same shoes. Not everybody has the same things that you have. And just understand that, we may need to do things a little different, being more flexible, trying to reach out both parents and teachers so that we can do this together. My final thought is teamwork makes the dream work.
Sure does. Thank you. Patty, and then we'll end with Roxanne.
Yes. So it's just been really hard. I mean, everything has been really stressful. But I feel like now my kids have, a lot more responsibilities here at home. They're more aware of a lot of things. And then, big plus, they know how to use a laptop now. They know how to use their PC, like for other than just video games. They know how to use Word doc and, all of these things that, I mean, they will need in the future. I mean, I think more and more we're, into technology and everything. And I think this is a great way for them to, get their foot in there. Like they're better at technology, not just games. And, they're more responsible sometimes. But, it's been hard. That's the main thing. It's been hard and stressful, but I think, it's working out.
Thank you. And it has. And I think we don't need to stop saying that, right? Like it has been hard, and we have to remember that is at the front of this, as it has been taxing on so many folks. Roxanne, if you want to help us close out.
Yeah, I think for me, two things come to mind is one, our educators never get enough credit, and educators are including all of our paras, our tutors, our support staff, anyone who works in the umbrella field of education. And this year, I mean, folks have really, really stepped up to the plate in unimaginable ways overnight and really rethought what classroom spaces look like, what engagement looks like, what schooling looks like. And I hope that elevation of our spirit and of our work continues to be highlighted as we move into school continuing in a physical building. I really appreciated what you said, Nikita, about, school's not going back. It's just transitioning to a building in the following years. And I think with that too, we really are primed and in this opportunity to really honestly rethink what school is looking like. I don't know that we're going to get another opportunity to redo and restart, dreaming about what is possible and doing it and rethinking our school systems and rethinking curriculum and rethinking how we're supporting teachers and staff and how, you know, what school looks like and the needs of our students and how we're going to meet them. We've had a whole year of being in this like gray space of maybe we're going back, maybe we're not. How are we transitioning to virtual? Now we're transitioning back to school. And I think it would be a missed opportunity if we just go back to quote unquote the way things were. If we just go back to the standard, like the status quo. Like there's so many ways that I think have been highlighted here today. And then also I know that we've all been thinking about to go back to school and do little things differently that are best in service of students, because we've had a hard reset this year. And I really wish and I really hope that we take advantage of this time and that we're able to dream and sit in that and then also act on it and not go back to the way things were, which honestly, there were lots of beautiful things and also a lot of very harmful practices for students and for staff and for families. And this is a time for us to not do that again. So.
Thank you. And thank you to each of you for the time you put in. I also recognize this week is the week that more and more students and your schools have been opening your physical doors for welcoming your kids back into the classroom. So, and to all the participants on the call today for knowing that, you know, that timing of having this discussion this morning. So we appreciate you. As we get ready to close out and thank our panelists. So first, if you would all just join me in giving them a huge thank you, whether you want to just clap or, you know, we have our virtual ways of doing that now, but thank you all for being here and for what you've shared. I'm going to do a quick, you should be seeing a poll right now in front of you. We really like to make sure, again, this goes to our, as a organization, really fostering what all of us can do and making sure that we all share our accountability for students and children in Oakland. Just your thoughts on, you know, a few of the ways that you see yourself as you leave this space, personally or professionally. What are some of the things, some of these themes we've talked about that you are imagining you're going to be impacting or supporting or doing, or even just thinking about further as you leave today? What are some of those things that you hope to do? So if you see that poll popped up in front of you, just go ahead. It's kind of a nice way to think about what you might be taking away with you from this discussion. And I know Nishat has linked the evaluation a few times, so please make sure you take a moment to do that. Otherwise, I again thank our panelists. We will be here again in the third Wednesday of July for our summer forum. Cassie, thank you for the reminder that tomorrow night OUSD is hosting the PK to 5 Literacy Summit for families. So if you have OUSD families that you want to encourage to attend, they'll also be celebrating the March Reading Challenge at that event and sharing more about where they are at with their literacy. So there's a link to the Zoom to be able to do that. If you have other announcements you want to drop in the chat for folks, please do so. And with that, I will just invite you to do the eval, check out that poll question, and we will see you soon. Thanks, folks, for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, and we will share all of this information online in the coming weeks.